Rain fell in whispers against the glass and steel of the Greyhaven Contemporary Museum. The droplets traced delicate patterns down the massive windows, blurring the city lights beyond into a melancholy watercolor. I sat alone in the corner of the grand hall, nursing a glass of champagne that had long since warmed in my hand. The fundraising gala swirled around me in a kaleidoscope of wealth and power, neither of which I possessed anymore, despite what my last name suggested. The museum's main gallery had been transformed for the evening modern sculptures bathed in cool blue light, waiters gliding between clusters of Greyhaven's elite, trays of hors d'oeuvres balanced like performance art, chamber music from a string quartet competed with the gentle percussion of rain against the glass dome overhead. It was beautiful, exclusive, and suffocating. My name tag read Silent Sponsor, the polite euphemism for someone who had donated just enough to warrant an invitation, but not enough to command attention. It might as well have said wallpaper for all the notice I received. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, the Mercer name alone would have drawn sycophants like moths to flame. Back then, I'd been Sloane Mercer Royston, wife of Graham Royston, daughter-in-law to State Senator Harold Royston, and heiress to the Mercer art fortune. I'd worn designer gowns instead of this season-old cocktail dress I'd carefully steamed this morning. I'd arrived in private cars, not the rain-soaked subway that had left me frantically trying to salvage my hair in the museum's public restroom. I adjusted the thin silver bracelet on my wrist, the last piece of genuine luxury I still owned, kept because it had been my grandmother's. Everything else of value had been sold to pay legal fees or to establish our new life. Now, I was 31, divorced, disgraced, and desperate to secure the restoration contract that would save my struggling curator business. My daughter Aria, my 6-year-old reason for breathing, was at home with her sitter, hopefully already tucked into bed with her favorite starry night lamp casting constellations across her ceiling. I caught snippets of whispers as people passed. Mercer money, shadowy investments, scandal. The words chased me like persistent ghosts. I took another sip of warm champagne and considered leaving. The contract negotiation could wait until morning. Then the crowd parted like the Red Sea. He moved through the space as if it had been designed around him. Not the other way around. Cassian Ruviero, the logistics entrepreneur who controlled Blackwater Port, the man whose name was spoken in hushed tones across Greyhaven. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the predator's grace in his movements, the awareness that seemed to emanate from every cell of his body. I'd never seen him in person before, only in the occasional newspaper photo or distant glimpse on local news. Those images hadn't captured the intensity that radiated from him like heat from asphalt in August. A slow waltz began to play, without hesitation, without scanning the room for more suitable partners. Cassian Ruviero walked directly to my corner. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. He inclined his head, a gesture that was both polite and somehow dangerous. "Save me a dance," he said. Not a question. Not quite a command. Before I could formulate a response, his warm hand took mine, and I found myself guided to the center of the floor. The crowd around us maintained a respectful or perhaps fearful distance. 1, 2, 3, he murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear the counting. 1, 2, 3. His hand at my waist was firm but not possessive. As we turned, I realized he was timing our movements to something beyond the music. His eyes, dark and alert, kept tracking to the eastern exit. 4, 5, 6, he continued, subtly steering us closer to the door with each revolution. 7, 8. I followed his gaze and spotted them 3 men in identical black tuxedos, moving with too much purpose through the gala. They weren't here for the art. The chandelier lights flickered once, twice. A fire alarm blared, then cut off abruptly. In the moment of confusion, a commotion erupted near the main gallery entrance. A man collapsed, a shocking bloom of red spreading across his white shirt. Cashin's grip on my hand tightened fractionally. His lips barely moved as he leaned closer. "I'm sorry," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "Tonight I need you to be both witness and shield." The evening that had started with me being invisible was about to make me dangerously visible. And somehow, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. "This way," Cassian said, guiding me firmly toward the glass balcony as screams and chaos erupted behind us. The cool night air hit my face as he closed the door, muffling the pandemonium inside. "What just happened? That man, is he dead?" I demanded, yanking my hand from his grip. "That man is part of an elaborate setup," Cassian replied, his calm demeanor unnerving. "Someone wants me in cuffs for a murder I didn't commit. They've had cameras positioned all evening, ready to capture the perfect frame that places me at the scene." His eyes met mine. Your unexpected presence in that frame threw off their timing. Rain misted around us, collecting in tiny droplets on the glass enclosure. Below, the city lights of Greyhaven blurred into watercolor smears. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, though part of me already did. I'd spent 3 years recognizing setups and smear campaigns. Graham, my ex-husband, had been a master at orchestrating them. "Because I'm offering you a simple deal," he said. "Let me get you home safely tonight, tomorrow. All you need to do is confirm my movements in a statement that we were dancing when the incident occurred. Nothing more." I hesitated. "And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, not threat, but resignation. "Then I walk away now. But consider who benefits if I'm removed from my position. Look at who's moving in." I followed his gesture back through the glass. The men in black tuxedos were flashing badges with the emblem of the Greyhaven Urban Order, the GUO, a semi-private security force that had been gaining power throughout the city. My blood chilled. The GUO had threatened my mother years ago when she tried to expose dirty money flowing through city contracts. The organization had expanded since then, swallowing more public functions under the guise of efficiency. "Fine," I said. "Get me home safely, and I'll confirm what I saw. Which is true, we were dancing when whatever happened. His car waited at a service entrance. A tall woman with close-cropped silver hair held the door open, her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Daria Kincaid," Cassian said by way of introduction, "my head of security." Once inside, Daria turned from the front seat. "The Sable Syndicate has bought influence in the GUO, she reported without preamble. "They've orchestrated this to force you out of Blackwater. The victim is one of their accountants, Gregory Walsh. It's a controlled bleeding setup." My phone buzzed with a message notification. When I looked down, my heart stopped. It was a photo of Aria standing in front of her kindergarten, taken earlier that day. The message below it was simple: keep silent. I showed it to Cassian without a word. He studied it for exactly 1 second, then spoke to his driver. "Change of route. Pier 13. As we drove through a tunnel connecting downtown to the waterfront district, I struggled to control my breathing. They know about my daughter. "Which means they've been planning this longer than I realized." Cassian said, "Daria, get eyes on Aria's location. Now." "Already on it," she replied, fingers moving rapidly over a tablet. We emerged at a loading dock bearing the name Ruviero Portworks. Cassian led me into an office overlooking shipping lanes where massive cargo vessels sat illuminated against the night. He pulled up a screen displaying a shipping manifest and a video feed showing him in this same office during the time of the incident. "This is my alibi," he said. "But it's not enough. The GUO can claim the feed is doctored. I need a human witness who can place me in the ballroom when the alarm sounded." "That's me," I acknowledged. "When you leave here, they'll likely stop you," he said, his voice low. "Don't let them check your phone. That threat makes you vulnerable, a potential accessory they can manipulate." As if on cue, flashing lights appeared on the security monitors. "GUO Patrol," Daria confirmed. When the uniformed officer approached our car as we left the port, I started my phone recording secretly in my purse. Routine check, he said, but his eyes said otherwise. Port access during investigation hours requires special clearance. We have clearance, Cashin replied evenly. There's a processing fee for after-hours verification, the officer continued, his implication clear. I leaned forward. Officer, could you clarify that fee? Is it standard procedure, or is this a special circumstance? His eyes narrowed at me, but I kept my phone recording as he stumbled through an explanation that amounted to a thinly veiled bribe request. As we drove away, Cashin gave me a measured look. Smart, he said. That's the first seed of countermeasure. I stared out at the rainy streets of Greyhaven, wondering how I'd gone from invisible wallflower to key player in a dangerous game in the span of a single dance. My old penthouse apartment in the Mercer Tower stood empty now, a ghost of my previous life. The panoramic windows and herringbone floors that had once graced the society pages of Architectural Digest now gathered dust behind a realtor's lockbox. The Mercer family had kept the deed, one more leash they hoped would eventually bring me to heel. Instead, Aria and I lived in a modest two-bedroom in Westbridge District, comfortable but anonymous. I'd traded crystal chandeliers for IKEA pendant lights and marble countertops for laminate. The walls were thin enough that we could hear Mrs. Patterson's television next door, but the building had good security and was 3 blocks from Aria's school. Most importantly, it was ours. I checked on Aria as soon as I got home, finding her sound asleep in her room adorned with glow-in-the-dark stars and her own colorful artwork. She clutched her stuffed otter mister, whiskers against her cheek, her dark curls spread across the pillow like a fan. In sleep, she looked so much like me that it caught my breath sometimes, but her determined little chin and the slight furrow between her brows, even in sleep, those were all Graham. I gently smoothed the furrow with my thumb and kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. Back in the living room, I kicked off my heels and sat at my small dining table with my laptop open, trying to make sense of the night's events. The champagne buzz had worn off, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. "Mommy, why did those people look at you funny?" Aria had asked earlier, when I'd gotten home from picking her up at school that afternoon. She was too perceptive for a 6-year-old, noticing the subtle changes in how others treated us since the divorce. "What people, sweetheart?" I'd asked, helping her out of her raincoat. "At school pickup, a man and lady were watching you. They didn't smile." My blood had run cold. I'd scanned the playground, seeing nothing suspicious, but I'd hurried her home faster than usual. Now, after the threatening message on my phone, her observation took on a sinister new meaning. The threat wasn't idle. They had been watching us, studying our routines. Now, as rain drummed against the windows of our apartment, memories of my marriage to Graham Royston surfaced like corpses in a flood. The perfectly crafted public image we'd maintained the senator's son and his art-world wife had hidden a calculated partnership. Graham had been charming, sophisticated, and utterly ruthless. His tailored suits and Ivy League polish concealed a coldness I'd only discovered after the wedding, when his ambitions began to eclipse any pretense of affection. I'd been his perfect society wife until I discovered I was also his perfect fall person for a money laundering scheme. When federal investigators started asking questions, Graham sacrificed me to save himself and his father's political career. I took my daughter and walked away from the Mercer family fortune rather than fight a battle that would have exposed Aria to years of ugly publicity. My parents, more concerned with social standing than justice, had disowned me. My phone buzzed with a text from Daria. Victim at museum was Sable accountant carrying empty USB drive. Staged murder designed to force legal pursuit. Real target is control of Blackwater Port. I called my friend Rhea Park the next morning, a brilliant art lawyer with razor-sharp intellect and even sharper fashion sense. She'd been the only one from my previous life who'd stood by me through the divorce. We'd met at Columbia. She'd been studying art law while I pursued museum studies, and our friendship had survived my whirlwind romance with Graham, my subsequent social rise, and my spectacular fall. We arranged to meet at Wolf Art Archives, a private research facility where Rhea maintained an office, located in a renovated textile factory in Greyhaven's Arts District. The building's brick exterior concealed state-of-the-art security and climate control systems, protecting millions of dollars worth of artwork and historical documents. Rhea was waiting in the reading room, her sleek black bob framing a face that rarely betrayed emotion. Today, however, her expression was tense as she slid a coffee across the polished table. "You're in trouble," she said without preamble, "and it has Ruviero's fingerprints all over it." I stirred my latte, buying time. "What makes you say that?" She opened her tablet, revealing security footage from the museum gala. "Because you're dancing with the most dangerous man in Greyhaven the same night a body drops. And now the GBI is hunting for a controllable witness." Hunting for what exactly? Rhea leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper despite the room's privacy. "They need someone who'll say they saw Ruviero near the victim before the incident. Someone who can place him in the South Corridor when their footage supposedly shows him there." "And if no one comes forward?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "They'll find someone vulnerable enough to pressure or bribe," she said grimly. "Someone with financial troubles, or legal exposure, or family obligations that create pressure points. Someone like a single mother with a past scandal who suddenly has access to Ruviero," I finished, understanding blooming like ice in my veins. Rhea's silence was confirmation enough. "What do you know about the I asked, remembering the men in tuxedos from the gala. "They started as a legitimate public-private partnership to supplement Greyhaven's underfunded police," Rhea explained. "But they've expanded beyond their mandate. They're now part law enforcement, part private security, part political enforcement tool with almost no oversight. And their connection to the Royston family." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "Graham's been appointed as their ethical compliance officer, a position created specifically for him 3 months ago. The timing wasn't coincidental. 3 months ago was when I'd finally secured enough clients to start rebuilding my career, when I'd begun to establish independence from the financial stranglehold my family and Graham had maintained. "There's something else," Rhea said, pulling a folder from her briefcase. "The museum restoration contract you're bidding on the competing firm is a shell company recently acquired by Orion Trust." "Never heard of them." "Few have. They operate through layers of subsidiaries, but their board includes Senator Royston and representatives from a shipping consortium called Sable." The pieces were starting to connect Cassian's port operations, the involvement. Graham's sudden reappearance in my orbit. This wasn't just about a fabricated murder charge. It was about control of Greyhaven's economic lifelines. "What should I do?" I asked. Rhea closed her tablet. "Legally document everything. Record any interactions with officers. Don't sign anything without me reviewing it first." She paused. "Studying me. Personally, be very careful about hitching your wagon to Cassian Ruviero's star. Even if he didn't kill that man, his world operates by different rules than ours." "Our rules haven't exactly protected me so far," I pointed out. "True," she acknowledged, "but at least our rules don't typically end with bodies in the harbor." As I left the archives, a courier approached me nondescript in a standard uniform, face obscured by a cap and the collar of his raincoat. "Delivery for Sloan Mercer," he said, extending a small package. I hesitated before accepting it, my nerves already frayed from the morning's revelations. "Sign here," he said, then disappeared into the rainy street before I could ask who'd sent it. Inside my car, I carefully opened the package to find a Venetian masquerade mask once elegant, now stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. A handwritten note accompanied it. "Good mothers keep secrets." My hands shook as I started the engine. I needed help, not just legal advice, but physical protection for Aria. I called Theo, my neighbor and Aria's occasional babysitter, as I pulled into traffic. "Theo, I need a huge favor. Can Aria stay with you tonight? Use the password Stargazer if anyone else tries to pick her up." "Everything okay, Sloan?" Just a work situation, I lied. I might be late. An hour later, a text from an unknown number gave me an address, Warehouse 6 at the north end of Blackwater. I almost ignored it until I saw the signature CR. The warehouse wasn't what I expected. Instead of the shadowy den of illicit activity the newspapers had implied, Warehouse 6 was meticulously organized, brightly lit, and buzzing with legitimate commerce. Shipping containers were arranged in precise rows, each labeled with QR codes and digital tracking numbers. Workers in safety vests operated forklifts, loading educational materials onto pallets. One container stood open, displaying medical equipment, hospital beds, diagnostic machines, and boxes of supplies labeled in multiple languages. Another held thousands of books, carefully packaged for distribution to public schools throughout Greyhaven's struggling districts. A third contained computer equipment destined for community centers. "Not what you imagined," Cashin's voice came from behind me. I turned to face him. He'd changed from his formal attire into dark jeans and a charcoal Henley that somehow made him look even more dangerous. Up close, I noticed a thin scar that traced his left jawline, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. "Is this a PR exercise?" I asked, gesturing to the charitable goods. His expression hardened slightly. "You think I'd use children's education as a shield?" I met his gaze steadily. "I think a man in your position would use whatever tools necessary to achieve his goals." To my surprise, he didn't bristle at my candor. Instead, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair assessment," he acknowledged. "But no, this is the future," he said simply, his hand sweeping across the warehouse floor. "The clean shipping lanes I'm redirecting resources toward." He led me to an office overlooking the warehouse floor, where digital displays tracked shipments across the globe. A woman with a tablet nodded respectfully as we passed. "Miranda oversees our educational initiatives," Cassian explained. "Former teacher, she ensures the materials actually reach the students who need them." Inside the office, he pulled up manifests showing legitimate goods flowing through Blackwater Port medical supplies to underserved clinics, technology for public schools, sustainable farming equipment for urban initiatives. 3 years ago, 60% of Blackwater's revenue came from looking the other way, he said bluntly. Now it's less than 15% and dropping monthly. "And that's why someone wants you gone," I surmised. "The Sable Syndicate built their operation on chaos and contraband. They need ports willing to let things slide." He tapped a map showing shipping routes. "When I began redirecting Blackwater toward legitimate commerce, they lost millions." For the first time since I'd met him, Cassian looked tired. He rubbed his forehead, the mask of control slipping slightly to reveal the weight he carried. "I was born into darkness, Miss Mercer," he said, his voice lower. "My father ran these docks through fear. When he died, I inherited not just his business, but his methods." He walked to the window overlooking the warehouse floor, his silhouette stark against the activity below. "I've spent 5 years trying to cut myself away from it, not just for appearances or legal protection, but because there has to be more than perpetuating cycles of violence and corruption. Sable won't allow that transition without a fight. They believe men like me don't change, we just find more sophisticated ways to be monsters." My phone chimed with a notification. A picture of Arya appeared on screen, me picking her up from school yesterday. Cassian glimpsed it before I could turn the phone away. His expression hardened as he looked at my daughter's smiling face. "The debts of parents should never fall on children," he said quietly. Something in his voice made me look up. For a moment, vulnerability replaced the calculated control in his eyes. "Experience?" I asked. "More than I care to remember," he replied. He handed me his coat as we walked out into the night air. Our fingers brushed, a momentary connection that sent an unexpected current through me. When he looked at me, his gaze lingered a beat longer than necessary. Neither of us acknowledged it, but something had shifted between us, something neither of us had anticipated. The Masquerade of Glass, a fundraising event to save the museum's educational programs, couldn't have come at a worse time. Under normal circumstances, I would have found an excuse to stay home, to keep my head down until the storm passed, but I needed to attend to sign the restoration contract, my last chance to salvage my career. The invitation had specified formal attire with masquerade elements. I'd spent the afternoon helping Aria with a school project, then rushed to prepare once Theo arrived to watch her. My dress, midnight blue with a subtle shimmer, purchased secondhand from a consignment shop, had been carefully steamed and hung ready. It was elegant without being ostentatious, a delicate balance I constantly navigated in my new life. My mask was a Swarovski-studded creation that had been a gift from a grateful client, a constellation of tiny crystals arranged in a celestial pattern that complemented the dress perfectly. As I fastened it in place, I studied my reflection, with my hair swept up and the mask obscuring half my face. I looked almost like the woman I'd been 3 years ago, confident, belonging. It was an illusion I needed to maintain, at least for tonight. "You look pretty, Mommy," Aria said from the doorway, her stuffed otter clutched to her chest. I knelt to her level, careful not to wrinkle the dress. "Thank you. Sweetheart, I won't be gone long. Theo's going to make pizza with you, and I'll be home before you know it." Her small hand touched the edge of my mask. "Are you a princess again tonight?" The innocent question squeezed my heart. In her earliest memories, I had been Princess Mommy, attending galas and benefits in designer gowns, returning home with stories of magnificent ballrooms and famous people. "Not a princess," I said softly, "just a curator who loves art and loves you even more." She nodded solemnly. "If the bad people come, hide like in hide and seek." I froze. "What bad people?" "Aria." "The ones Theo said might try to trick us." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "He taught me the password is stargazer, and I shouldn't go with anyone who doesn't know it." I made a mental note to thank Theo for his thoroughness while cursing the necessity of it. My 6-year-old daughter shouldn't need security protocols. At the museum, the masquerade was in full swing, more extravagant than the previous gala. The glass dome had been transformed with hanging crystal installations that refracted light in dazzling patterns across the floor. Attendees in elaborate masks and formal wear created a surreal, otherworldly atmosphere, as if we'd all stepped through a portal into a more beautiful, dangerous dimension. I spotted Cassian immediately. His presence altered the energy of any room he entered. Despite his own black mask, there was no disguising the way he moved, the respect and wariness he commanded without effort. He wore a tuxedo that fit him with the precision of armor, making even the wealthiest donors look slightly underdressed in comparison. Our eyes met across the room, and my pulse quickened traitorously. We'd spoken several times since that night at the warehouse, carefully coordinated calls discussing what I'd observed and what I'd tell investigators. But we hadn't been in the same physical space since the clinic, since the moment something had shifted between us. Just one dance to establish my location timeline. His text had read, "Then we go our separate ways." It was sensible, professional, safe. And yet, as he approached me through the swirl of masks and finery, I felt anything but safe. The danger had nothing to do with external threats and everything to do with the way my body responded to his proximity. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. Then, all business. "They'll make their move tonight. Voss is here, southeast entrance." I glanced subtly in that direction, spotting the rail-thin inspector in conversation with 2 GUO officers. "How can you be sure?" "Because I leaked information about my attendance through channels they monitor. They won't waste the opportunity for a public arrest." "That's quite a gamble," I noted, accepting his outstretched hand as the orchestra began a waltz. "I'm not gambling," he replied, leading me onto the floor with the same effortless grace as before. "I'm forcing their hand while I control the variables." As we moved together, I became aware of subtle changes in the room. Officers taking positions near exits, a camera crew from the local news station setting up near the main stage, Graham's arrival with a small entourage of political aides. "Your ex-husband is here," Cassian murmured, his hand warm at my waist. "I saw," I replied, maintaining my smile for any observers, "with reinforcements." "Rhea is in position," he continued, referring to our contingency plan. My friend had secured legal documentation challenging any arrest attempt based on the evidence tampering we suspected. "Daria has the technical team ready." "If this goes wrong," I began. "It won't," he said with quiet certainty. "But if it does," I insisted, "promise me Arya will be protected. That's my non-negotiable condition." His eyes met mine, serious behind his mask. "I swear it, on my life." During our waltz, the stage lights suddenly shifted to blood red, bathing the entire room in an eerie crimson glow. The massive screens meant for donor recognition flashed to life, showing what appeared to be surveillance footage of Cassian apparently stabbing the accountant in a darkened corridor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The music stuttered to a halt as all eyes turned to the screens, then to us. I felt Cassian's hand tighten slightly on mine, not in fear, but in preparation. The ballroom erupted in controlled panic, donors backing away from us, security personnel moving forward, camera flashes punctuating the chaos like lightning. GUO and officers flooded in from multiple entrances, forming a perimeter. At their center walked Chief Inspector Voss, a manila folder in his hands, his satisfaction poorly concealed beneath a veneer of professional solemnity. "Cassian Ruviero," he announced with theatrical formality, his voice cutting through the commotion. "You're under arrest for the murder of Gregory Walsh." I stepped forward, phone in hand. "Before you do that," I said, voice steadier than I felt, "I think you should hear this recording of one of your officers soliciting bribes at a port checkpoint." The playback echoed through the suddenly quiet room. Voss's face contorted with fury. Daria activated a secondary projector, displaying real-time footage from the west entrance, showing Cassian there during the alleged stabbing, which occurred on the south side. "Timestamp verification," she announced calmly. "Your evidence has been manipulated. Inspector?" A familiar laugh cut through the tension, smooth and cultured, with the practiced charm that had once seduced me. Graham Royston stepped forward, adjusting his cufflinks. "As ethical counsel to the GUSS," he said, "I must insist we separate Miss Mercer for questioning. Her history of financial impropriety raises concerns about testimony credibility." My ex-husband's eyes were just as I remembered, dark, empty pools beneath his perfect smile. Cassian's hand found the small of my back, guiding me toward a sculpture-lined hallway before GUO officers could reach us. "Keep your eyes on me," he whispered. Behind a massive installation, in the shadow of polished marble. Cassian paused, sweat beaded on his forehead. Chalk dust from the sculptures clung to his sleeves. For a heartbeat, we stood suspended in time. "May I?" he asked, his eyes on mine. I nodded once, and he leaned forward, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was brief but decisive, a promise made in the gathering storm. "They're coming," he said, pulling back. "We need to separate. Harder to target that way." The click of approaching shoes echoed like a metronome counting down to danger. I discovered the GUO control room hidden beneath the glass basement of the museum. Using a guest pass from my curator days, I slipped inside and found what I was looking for, logs showing edits to security footage by someone with the code name Kestrel. I was downloading the data when Inspector Voss spotted me through the glass partition. The chase began through rain-slicked glass corridors, my heels skidding dangerously with each turn. I grabbed a conservation spray bottle, creating a fog of preservation mist to obscure his view. "Lock corridor section E." I heard Cassian's voice through my earpiece. Daria had slipped it to me earlier. A security door slammed shut behind me. Trapping Voss, my only escape route led upward to the roof. The whine of news helicopters cut through the rain. My phone rang, a FaceTime call from Graham. When I answered, the camera swiveled to show Arya on a playground I didn't recognize. "She's a beautiful child," Graham said, his voice pleasant as if we were discussing the weather. "Such a shame she has a mother with such poor judgment." My legs nearly gave out. Cassian took the phone from my trembling hands and held it to his ear. "Touch that child," he said, his voice a cold blade, and the rules of engagement change entirely. I was shaking but forced myself to focus. Through the external speaker on my phone, I manipulated Voss into reading a door code incorrectly, buying precious seconds. Cassian hoisted me onto his back, and we jumped from the awning to the alley 7 stories below, landing on a strategically positioned cargo pad. We raced to the Ashlane Community Clinic where Theo had taken Aria, thanks to Daria's quick redirection. When I saw my daughter, safe and coloring peacefully with Theo, I broke down in tears of relief and laughter. That night, in the dimly lit back room of the clinic, with my daughter sleeping safely nearby, Cassian and I finally allowed ourselves a moment of vulnerability. The adrenaline of escape had subsided, leaving us in a quiet aftermath where words seemed inadequate. The room was sparsely furnished, a worn leather couch, a desk lamp casting a warm glow, medical supply shelves lining one wall. A small window revealed the continued rainfall, droplets catching the streetlight in golden flickers. "Your hands are still shaking," Cassian observed, his voice soft in the stillness. I hadn't noticed until he mentioned it. Delayed reaction, I guess. Not every day you leap off a museum roof. He approached slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back or create distance. When I remained where I was, he gently took my hands in his thumbs making small, soothing circles on my palms. "I never meant to put you in danger," he said, "or Aria." I looked up at him, seeing beyond the carefully constructed image of Cassian Ruviero, Port King, to the man beneath, complicated, conflicted, carrying burdens I was only beginning to understand. "We were already in danger," I replied. "I just didn't know it." Our foreheads touched, breaths mingling in the quiet space. His hands moved to cup my face with a gentleness that belied their strength. I found myself leaning into his touch, the warmth of his palms against my cheeks anchoring me after hours of fear and uncertainty. "You're safe," he whispered against my lips, his words half promise, half prayer. When our lips finally met, the kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered in the space between heartbeats. Then it deepened, conveying everything we couldn't yet say aloud. My hands found the solid wall of his chest, his heartbeat strong and rapid beneath my palm. His arms encircled me, protective yet respectful, pulling me closer. Our kisses were slow, deliberate, each one a conversation in itself. His hands traced reverent patterns along my back, my shoulders, through my hair, never presuming, always checking for my response. Mine explored the tension in his shoulders, the surprising softness of his hair at the nape of his neck, the strong line of his jaw. We moved together in a dance far more intimate than our waltz, but equally measured, equally aware of the world beyond our small sanctuary. Each touch was both question and answer. "Is this okay?" "Yes. May I please?" When we finally separated, breathless, his forehead resting against mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of being truly seen, not as an extension of a family name or a scandal, but as myself. "I've spent 3 years running," I whispered against his neck, breathing in his scent of cedar and rain. "I'm done running." His arms tightened around me, and I felt something shift in both of us, a decision to move from victims of circumstance to active players in whatever came next. "Then we stand," he murmured into my hair, "together." In the next room, Aria slept peacefully under Theo's watchful eye, unaware that her world had shifted on its axis. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and difficult choices, but for this moment, in the circle of Cassian's arms, I allowed myself to believe in possibility. Ria filed an emergency petition demanding independent investigation of the GUO. SS conduct. The city judge temporarily transferred authority to the Cultural Integrity Commission, a civilian oversight board with surprising teeth. Daria traced Kestrel to a technical unit within the GUO, funded directly by Graham, inserting manipulated evidence into the system through sophisticated bots. Together, Cashin and I built a presentation of timelines, shipping manifests, and location data. I would present it, not Cassian, to expose the GUO Sable connection before the city council. "There's something you should know," Cassian said one night as we prepared. "My past isn't clean. Parts of Blackwater operated in gray areas for years." "I figured as much," I replied. "I'm agreeing to complete transparency of clean port operations, community auditing sacrificing a measure of control." In my small kitchen, I practiced my presentation while Arya drew hearts and boats with colored markers. "I'm naming it Stargazer," she announced, pointing to her creation. The night before the hearing, Cassian took me to an abandoned shiphold called Lumen. "Listen," he said, as pipes amplified the sounds of water against steel, the only music my father ever shared with me. That night, we made love with full consent and awareness, our bodies finding rhythm in the metallic symphony surrounding us, the warmth of his skin against mine, our breaths synchronizing as we moved together, his whispers against my ear asking permission, confirming consent, my hands mapping the geography of scars along his back, his reverent exploration of me. Afterward, we lay tangled together, more peaceful than either of us had been in years. In the morning, I found a handwritten note in my jacket pocket. "If you say stop, I stop." 5 words that contained more respect than I'd experienced in years of marriage. We walked into City Hall as a team, backed by Daria, Ria, Theo, and several dock workers who had chosen to support Cassian's transition to legitimate business. I presented our evidence with cold precision: the edited camera logs, shipping manifests, recorded bribes, and a map showing connections between the Sable Syndicate and GUO leadership. Cashin stood and acknowledged his past responsibility, committing to transfer Port Authority to the newly established Beacon Harbor Trust under community oversight. The Cultural Integrity Commission announced a criminal investigation into the GUO and Inspector Voss. Graham's name was publicly connected to the corruption. He maintained his composure, but I caught the dangerous flicker in his eyes. The media narrative shifted overnight. Port boss became harbor administrator in transition. Disgraced Mercer daughter became cultural whistleblower. That evening, a text from my mother appeared. "You did what I should have done long ago." The first step toward healing a family wound 3 years in the making. Cashin took Arya for vanilla ice cream. He knelt to her eye level, asking what she thought the name of a ship should be. "Stargazer," she said without hesitation. For a moment, Greyhaven seemed peaceful. I foolishly thought we'd reach shore. Then Daria received an unmarked black folder containing photographs of Cassian, shaking hands with Graham's adoptive father, Senator Royston, years earlier. She hid it away. A hero's secrets revealed at the wrong moment could destroy everything we'd built. 2 weeks of relative calm followed. Cashin and I developed a routine breakfast with Arya before school, evenings spent planning the port transition. Domesticity felt strange but welcome after years of chaos. The Cultural Integrity Commission's investigation progressed. With Voss suspended pending review, Graham maintained a low profile, which worried me more than his presence. "He's planning something." I told Cassian, "Graham never retreats without a counter-strategy." On a rainy Tuesday, the hammer fell. The Orion Trust, a shell company connected to both the Royston family and Sable, announced a maritime development initiative that would effectively control access to Greyhaven's shipping lanes. Simultaneously, Inspector Voss was reinstated under emergency protocols. The first GUO-I patrol boats appeared in Blackwater Harbor the next morning. That night, our apartment door was spray-painted with a symbol, a red kestrel. "They're sending a message," Cassian said, his jaw tight. "They've found leverage." The leverage became clear when Daria intercepted a financial record showing the Orion Trust had acquired my substantial debt to the Mercer family money I'd borrowed to start my independent career. "They'll use it to force you to recant your testimony," Ria explained. "If you don't, they'll take everything, including custody of Aria, claiming financial instability." I looked at Cassian across my kitchen table. "What's our move?" His eyes met mine. That's the first step. We gathered our allies, Ria with her legal expertise, Daria with her security knowledge, Theo representing community support, and several reformed dock workers loyal to Cassian's vision. The Orion Trust keeps their physical ledgers in a secured vault at warehouse 23 inches, Cassian explained. Their digital records are immaculate, but their paper trail would expose the connection between G, U, O, Royston, and Sable. "Why keep paper at all?" Theo asked. "Because men like Alaric Doss believe in power they can touch." Cassian answered, "Doss is old-school mafia who partnered with Sable. He doesn't trust digital-only records." We formulated a plan. While the city council debated port jurisdiction, we would access the vault, retrieve the evidence, and broadcast it directly to the council chambers. "This isn't just about us anymore," I said, looking at the faces around me. "It's about what Greyhaven becomes." 3 nights later, under cover of a shipping inspection, we moved into position. The rain that had been Greyhaven's constant companion for weeks had finally stopped, leaving a mist that hung over the docks like a veil between worlds. The vast shipping yard of Warehouse 23 stretched before us, a maze of containers, cranes and security lights casting harsh shadows across wet concrete. I wore the uniform of a port auditor navy blazer with official patches, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back in a severe bun. Cassian and Daria posed as compliance officers in similar attire. Ria waited in a van 3 blocks away, maintaining communication and ready to transmit whatever evidence we secured. "Remember," Cassian said as we approached the main gate, "if anything goes wrong, your priority is getting out. The ledger is secondary." "I know what I'm doing," I said, adjusting my fake identification badge. His eyes met mine. "That's what worries me." The guard barely glanced at our credentials before waving us through, another security flaw we'd counted on. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, stacked with shipping containers and dominated by a central administrative building where, according to our intelligence, the Orion Trust kept their physical records. "We have 20 minutes before the real inspection team arrives," Daria murmured through our earpieces. "Stick to the timeline." What we didn't expect was Graham's presence at the warehouse, his tailored suit incongruous among the dock workers, or Voss's tactical team lying in wait, their vehicles poorly concealed behind a row of containers. "We've been compromised," Cassian said quietly, his hand touching my arm in warning. Something tipped them off. Before we could retreat, floodlights burst to life, bathing the yard in harsh white light. Alarms blared from multiple directions. "Split up," Cassian ordered as black-clad figures began to converge. "Stick to the contingency." We scattered like startled birds. The contingency plan was simple but dangerous. Divide their forces. Access the vault from the secondary entrance. Rendezvous at one of 3 extraction points depending on resistance. I raced through container corridors, my heels echoing against metal and concrete. The layout Cassian had drilled into me over the past 3 days now became my lifeline, left at the blue container, right at the forklift station, past the maintenance shed to the administrative building's rear entrance. The door yielded to the security card Daria had cloned. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered over empty desks and silent computers. I navigated through the cubicle maze toward the records section, my breath coming in quick. Controlled bursts. Reaching the administrative section, I found the vault door a heavy steel barrier with an electronic lock and Graham waiting beside it, casually leaning against the wall as if expecting me. "You always did have a talent for backing the wrong horse. Sloan," he said conversationally, his voice bringing back a flood of unwanted memories. He looked exactly as he had during our marriage, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my current rent. His dark hair artfully styled, his smile as practiced as ever. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold and empty, calculating even in their apparent ease. "And you always had a talent for underestimating me," I replied, sliding my hand into my pocket where the signal jammer Daria had given me waited. My finger found the activation button, but I didn't press it yet. Graham straightened. Adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit I recognized from whenever he was about to deliver a rehearsed speech. "You know, this doesn't have to be unpleasant," Ma, he said, his tone reasonable. "The Orion Initiative benefits everyone. The city gets modernized shipping infrastructure. The port gets proper oversight, and you—" He smiled thinly. "You could have your life back, Sloan, the penthouse, your position in society, proper schools for Aria. With what strings attached? A simple statement about Ruviero's business practices, your first-hand observations during your association with him." I laughed, the sound harsh in the sterile office. "You want me to perjure myself as a character witness? Again." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, the same one he'd worn throughout our marriage. Expensive and deliberately subtle. "Harold always admired Ruviero's business acumen," Graham said, changing tactics, "before things deteriorated." "What are you talking about?" Graham's smile sharpened. "Ask your new lover about the Royston-Ruviero agreement from 7 years ago," he said, his voice dropping confidentially. "About the merchandise that moved through Blackwater during my father's first Senate campaign. Before you throw yourself fully into his redemption story." The implications hung in the air between us, another potential betrayal, another man using me as a pawn. I pushed the doubt away, focusing on the present danger. I activated the jammer, cutting the vault's connection to the security system. The heavy door unlocked with an audible click that seemed to surprise Graham as much as the sudden darkness as the power briefly flickered. He lunged for me with unexpected speed, his hand grasping for my throat. But I wasn't the same woman who had left our marriage in tears 3 years ago. Years of pent-up rage gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I slammed my clipboard into his throat and drove my knee upward, connecting solidly. As he doubled over, I shoved him aside, grabbing the leather-bound ledger marked Orion Maritime Fund from the now open vault. Through my earpiece, I heard gunshots from another section of the warehouse, sharp cracks that echoed through the building. "Cassian," I called out, heart in my throat. "Secure the objective." His voice came through, strained but steady. "Get to extraction point B. Daria's pinned down by Voss. I'm heading to intercept." I ran through the rain-slicked container yard, the precious ledger tucked inside my jacket, protected from the drizzle that had started again. My breath came in sharp bursts, visible in the cool night air. The security lights cast long shadows between the containers, creating a disorienting maze of light and darkness. Reaching the broadcast point, a maintenance shed with a hardwired connection to the city's emergency system, I ducked inside, bolting the door behind me. The small space was cramped with outdated equipment, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I cleared a space on the dusty desk, setting up the portable scanner Rhea had provided. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the ledger, revealing page after page of meticulous accounting shell companies, offshore transfers, names and dates carefully documented in neat handwriting. I began photographing pages, uploading them directly to the secure feed Rhea had prepared. Each image took precious seconds to transmit through the emergency system's limited bandwidth. "Upload progress," Rhea's voice came through my earpiece, tense but professional. 30%, I replied. "There's more here than we expected direct payments to GUO officials, including Voss, and a separate section on political contributions to the Royston Campaign Fund. Keep going. The council session is in progress. We need that evidence before they vote on the port jurisdiction transfer." Through the shed's grimy window, I caught glimpses of the confrontation unfolding across the container yard. Daria was pinned down behind a forklift, exchanging fire with two of Voss's tactical officers, another figure, Theo, who had insisted on joining our operation despite my protests, was working his way around the perimeter, using his medical credentials to access the warehouse's security office. Then I saw Cassian confronting a heavy-set older man in the container alley, Alaric Doss. According to the photos Daria had shown us during our planning, Doss moved with surprising agility for his size, his movements suggesting military training beneath the expensive suit. "You owe me, boy." Doss's voice carried through the rain, amplified by the metal containers surrounding them. "Our arrangement years back kept you breathing. Now I'm collecting." I adjusted the shed's ancient audio system, boosting the gain to capture their confrontation. "That debt was paid," Cassian replied, his voice steady, with interest. "Not to my satisfaction," Doss growled. "You were supposed to maintain our access through Blackwater. Instead, you've been systematically cutting us out, playing the reformed businessman." They circled each other in the narrow space between shipping containers, like predators assessing weaknesses. "People change, Alaric." Doss laughed, a harsh sound like gravel. "Not men like us. We just find better covers for what we are." "That's where you're wrong," Cassian said. They fought hand to hand, brutal and efficient. Clearly neither man was a stranger to physical confrontation. Doss had the advantage of weight and raw power. Cassian the edge in speed and precision. Metal clanged as bodies impacted against container walls. Cassian took a vicious blow from a baton that sent him to one knee, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. I fought the urge to abandon my post and help him. The evidence in my hands was our only real weapon without it. Any victory tonight would be temporary at best. To my surprise, Cassian rose again, refusing to draw the weapon I knew he carried, even now, at this critical juncture. He was committed to his transformation to winning through legitimate means, rather than the violence that had shaped his earlier life. 70% uploaded, I reported to Rhea, forcing my attention back to the task. Starting the section on the museum funding now. Nearby, Daria had managed to subdue Voss, zip-tying his hands behind his back as he cursed through a bloodied mouth. Theo's voice came through the comms. "Security feed accessed. Transmitting suppressed footage from the museum gala now." Rhea's response was immediate. "Authorization confirmed, live feed active." In perfect synchronicity, I transmitted the final pages of the Orion Ledger along with Theo's recovered footage of Voss tampering with evidence. The images would be broadcasting to the screens in City Hall, where an emergency night session on port violence was underway. At the same moment, through the window, I saw Cassian bring Doss down with a precise strike to the knee, followed by a swift blow to the solar plexus that left the older man gasping on the wet pavement. Cassian stood over him, fist raised for a finishing blow, but then slowly lowered his hand. He had chosen law over vengeance, system over personal retribution. The wail of sirens pierced the night as neutral G-U-O. Tactical teams commanded directly by the Cultural Integrity Commission rather than Voss's corrupt division stormed into the container yard. Voss and Doss were handcuffed and led to separate vehicles through the warehouse window. Cassian stood in the harsh light of emergency vehicles, his posture straight despite his injuries. His eyes scanned the yard until they found me through the rain-streaked glass of the maintenance shed. Even at a distance, the connection between us was palpable. We shared a smile that needed no words, a moment of triumph tinged with exhaustion and relief. When safety was finally confirmed, I emerged from the shed, the empty ledger covers tucked under my arm as evidence. The rain had increased, soaking through my thin auditor's uniform, but I barely noticed. Cassian walked toward me, limping slightly, blood mingling with rainwater on his face. We met in the middle of the yard, heedless of the officers and medics moving around us. I ran the final steps to him, embracing him fiercely, feeling his solid warmth against me, the physical proof that he had survived. Our kiss tasted of sweat and tears and rain, desperate and affirming. "Is it over?" I whispered against his mouth. "The beginning of the end," he replied, his arms tightening around me. My phone rang a video call. I answered to see Aria's beaming face on the screen, safe in the safe house where we'd arranged for her to stay during the operation. "I named the boat. Mommy," she announced excitedly, holding up a crayon drawing of a small vessel with a star on its sail. "That's wonderful, baby," I said, tears mixing with raindrops on my cheeks. "What did you name it?" "Stargazer," she proclaimed proudly, "because it follows the stars to find home." Her innocent wisdom and clear laughter cut through the thick night like the first light of dawn, a reminder of why we had taken such risks, not just for ourselves, but for the future she and other children would inherit. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks with a momentum that seemed both inevitable and miraculous. The Cultural Integrity Commission announced its findings. The GUO would be disbanded, its legitimate functions transferred to a newly established Grey Haven Civilian Guard with transparent oversight and community representation. The Orion Trust assets were frozen pending a complete audit. Their port development initiative permanently shelved. Representatives from the Sable Syndicate quietly left the city, their power base eroded by the exposure of their political connections. The evidence we'd gathered revealed a web of corruption far more extensive than we'd initially suspected. Senator Royston announced his resignation, citing health concerns, a transparent attempt to distance himself from the scandal engulfing his associates. Voss and several high-ranking GUO officials faced criminal charges for evidence tampering, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Cassian, true to his word, signed over majority ownership of Ruviero Portworks to the newly created Stargazer Foundation, named at Aria's suggestion, with strict provisions against illicit commerce and requirements for community benefit. He remained as term-limited executive director, subject to regular community auditing and transparent governance. The transformation he had begun years ago was now codified in legal structures that would outlast any individual. The media narrative shifted with dizzying speed. Port boss became harbor administrator in transition. Disgraced Mercer daughter became cultural whistleblower. The same publications that had gleefully reported my downfall now approached me for exclusive interviews about art fraud and financial transparency in cultural institutions. I was appointed director of the Open Conservation Program at the museum, a position that allowed me to combine my expertise in art restoration with community education, teaching disadvantaged youth valuable preservation skills while making art accessible to all of Grey Haven's citizens. The restoration contract that had initially brought me to the fateful gala was expanded to include a complete overhaul of the museum's collection management practices. Even my relationship with my family began to thaw. A text from my mother appeared one evening. "You did what I should have done long ago." It wasn't an apology. The Mercers didn't apologize, but it was an acknowledgement, the first step toward healing a family wound 3 years in the making. Graham faced conspiracy charges related to his role in the evidence manipulation. Despite his legal troubles, he attempted to leverage his parental rights to see Aria, claiming a sudden interest in fatherhood that had been notably absent during our marriage and the years following our divorce. "He's using her as a bargaining chip," I told Cassian as we reviewed the court filing. "He thinks access to Aria will give him leverage to negotiate a more favorable plea deal." "What do you want to do?" he asked, his support unquestionable regardless of my decision. I considered the question carefully. Despite everything, Graham was still Aria's biological father. Cutting that connection entirely seemed unnecessarily punitive to her, even if it would have been emotionally satisfying for me. "I'll refuse the unsupervised visitation in court," I decided finally. "But I'll offer family therapy if he genuinely wants to change. The door isn't closed, but the key remains in the hands of those willing to do the work of transformation." Cassian nodded, understanding both my reservations and my hope for something better than the cycle of revenge and retribution that had shaped so much of Grey Haven's history. On a warm evening, a month after the warehouse confrontation, we gathered on the renovated dock of Pier 13. The sunset painted the harbor in shades of gold and amber, glinting off the newly installed public art installations that transformed the once industrial space into a community gathering place. String lights twinkled above the boardwalk, where local vendors sold crafts and street food. As a jazz quartet played on a small stage, Cashin extended his hand to me. "May I have this dance?" Together, we moved to the gentle rhythm, the symphony of ship horns and harbor sounds, creating a backdrop more meaningful to us than any orchestral arrangement. His lips found mine, gentle at first, then deeper as the song continued. His hands remained steady at my back. My face, threading through my hair with reverent attention. His whispered, "I'm here," against my ear was all the promise I needed, safe, voluntary, tender yet passionate. Nearby, Aria ran circles with her kite, its tail streaming like a comet against the darkening sky. Her laughter rang out like bells, pure and untouched by the dangers we had faced to secure her future. Daria, Ria, and Theo sat on a freshly painted container turned into an impromptu picnic table, sharing stories and plans for the continued transformation of Blackwater Port. For the first time since my divorce, perhaps for the first time in my life, Greyhaven truly saw me, not as an extension of the Mercer name, not as Graham Royston's ex-wife, not as a scandal or a cautionary tale, but as myself, Sloane, a woman who had found her strength in the most unexpected circumstances. A new bronze plaque hung at the harbor entrance, its message simple but profound: "Where cargo is clean and people are seen." It represented everything we had fought for: transparency, legitimacy, and the recognition of human dignity above profit. Cashin extended his hand, echoing that first night at the museum gala, "Save me a dance." I smiled, taking his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life far removed from the polished businessmen I'd known before. "For a lifetime," I replied. As we swayed together under the harbor lights, I thought about the unlikely journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 months ago, I had been invisible, a disgraced ex-socialite clinging to the edges of a world that had discarded me. He'd been feared, respected for his power, but assumed to be beyond redemption. Together, we'd found something neither of us had expected: the courage to step into the light and be truly seen. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his lips brushing my temple. "How strange life is," I answered. "If I hadn't been at that exact spot in the museum that night, I would have found you eventually," he said with quiet certainty. "Some paths are inevitable." I laughed softly. That's surprisingly romantic for a man who schedules his day in 15-minute increments. "I'm learning flexibility," he replied, spinning me gently beneath his arm. "You're teaching me." Later, as we walked along the boardwalk, Aria skipping ahead to examine a tide pool with Theo's supervision, Cassian grew more serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "about the Royston connection Graham mentioned." I tensed involuntarily. Part of me had been avoiding this conversation, afraid of what truths might still lie buried in Cassian's past. 7 years ago, when I first took control of Blackwater after my father's death, I was approached by Senator Royston, he explained, his eyes on the distant horizon rather than my face. He offered political protection for certain shipping lanes in exchange for financial support of his campaign. It was standard practice at the time. The port had operated that way for decades. "Did you agree?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Yes," he admitted. "For 14 months, I maintained the arrangement my father had established. Special containers moved through designated areas without inspection. Campaign funds flowed through shell companies, and everyone profited." He paused, finally looking at me directly. "Then a shipping container from Malaysia was mislabeled instead of electronics. It contained people. 12 women and children being trafficked for a client in Royston's circle." My breath caught. What happened? I ensured they received medical care and legal assistance to apply for asylum. Then I began systematically dismantling the special arrangements. Royston was furious, threatened exposure of my other activities, even physical retaliation. That's when I made a deal with Doss for protection. His jaw tightened. It was an ugly solution to an uglier problem. I'm not proud of it. Why tell me this now? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Because you deserve the whole truth before deciding what comes next for us, he said simply. I've done things I can't undo. I've hurt people. The man I was 3 years ago isn't someone you should have trusted. I considered his words carefully. The relationship developing between us wasn't built on illusions. Neither of us was innocent or unblemished. But there was something powerful in his willingness to expose his darkest moments, to trust me with the truth rather than a sanitized version of himself. The past matters, I said finally, but so does what you choose to do with it. You could have continued on that path. It would have been easier, more profitable. Instead, you chose to change, knowing it would make you a target. I took his hand, tracing the scar across his palm that he'd never explained. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest with me and with yourself. His fingers closed around mine, warm and secure. That I can promise. Aria ran back to us, her shoes wet from the tide pool, excitement bubbling over. I found a starfish. Theo says it's called an echinoderm, and it can grow back its arms if they get hurt. Cassian knelt to her level, something he always did when speaking with her. That's pretty amazing resilience, wouldn't you say? She nodded emphatically. Just like people can get better after they're hurt too. He glanced up at me, surprise and something like wonder crossing his features at her simple wisdom. No one had promised us that storms wouldn't come again. Greyhaven's transformation, like our own, would face resistance and setbacks, the systems of power that had protected Graham and his father, that had allowed the GUO to operate with impunity, that had kept Blackwater Port in shadows for generations. Those systems wouldn't disappear overnight. But we had built shelter from truth, love, and community, 3 pillars not easily toppled. We had allies who shared our vision for transparency and justice. Most importantly, we had stopped running from our pasts and started building a future. In the harbor lights, with my daughter's laughter and Cassian's arms around me, I finally understood sometimes you have to dance with danger to find your way home. And sometimes, in the most unexpected partner, you discover exactly what you need to face whatever comes next. As night fell completely over Greyhaven, stars emerged above the port that had seen so much darkness and was now, finally, stepping into the light. Cassian's hand found mine in the gathering darkness. Solid and real and present, whatever tomorrow brought, we would face it together, no longer invisible, no longer in shadows, but fully seen and choosing our own path forward. The harbor bell rang out across the water, marking the hour, beginnings and endings. I thought, sometimes you couldn't tell them apart until you were already in the middle of the next chapter. This chapter, at least, felt like one worth writing. One word, one day, one dance at a time.